Welcome to Proverbs 31 Creatives. My name is Brianna Coleman. I'm so excited for this new chapter in my walk with the Lord. My goal with this podcast is to encourage other women to grow their creativity, entrepreneurship, finances, life, health, and most importantly, grow closer to Jesus. I'll be having conversations with guests with anointed women in faith and learning right along with you. Are you ready to start your journey to become the creative Proverbs 31 woman you've always wanted to be? All right, let's go. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Proverbs 31 Creatives. I'm your host, Brianna Coleman. How are we doing? How is everybody? I cannot even begin to understand the fact that we are almost through August. By the time this episode airs, it will be, I think, August 20th, maybe 21st. I can't remember. But anyway, I'm getting texts every 5 minutes from my sister reminding me that pumpkin comes out very soon. So we're going to get our pumpkin coffee soon. I am one of those people, I refuse to drink anything or have anything pumpkin related until at least September 1st. But I know I have so many of my friends that are so excited for the pumpkin season. So if that is you, please let me know. This summer has absolutely flown by. I feel like between balancing all that I am doing behind the scenes, it has just been one thing after another, but it's all good things. And that's what is so exciting about this season that I'm in. I took over the leadership. Well, I started the social media team at my church. And so I am the leader over that, the social media and photography team, doing some client work with social media management, and then working on the launch and getting the company off the ground, which that launch is almost exactly a month away on September 22nd. And then I work part-time as a virtual admin with Everything Cincy. I also do content creation for them, which if you're not familiar, if you're not from Cincinnati or live in the area, Everything Cincy is an Instagram, social media page. We're on multiple different platforms, but Instagram is the big platform that we're on. I think it's like 60,000 followers or something like that. And basically it's a marketing agency for local Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky businesses. And so that has been a lot of fun. I feel like and I was explaining this to one of my friends recently, that working with Everything Cincy and doing social media for my church has really sparked my creativity again, because for the longest time when I was just doing social media management stuff, it really affected my creativity because there was so much pressure to go viral. And mind you, I was getting good results for my clients, but just the pressure of trying to go viral for these clients, it really took away from just creating for fun and having fun behind the camera and all these different things. So it has definitely been a season of repairing my relationship with creating, if that makes sense. And so needless to say, my schedule has been very busy, and I was explaining to my mom, like, everything I have on my plate, but everything that I'm doing in this podcast as well, everything that I'm doing is just bringing me so much joy. And I love the season that I'm in right now, even though this is probably the busiest I've been in a long time. And the fact that and I just mentioned this, but the fact that we're almost exactly a month away from the company launching, it literally makes my stomach do backflips, and in the best way possible. This is something that I have been carrying with the Lord since October of last year, and this is something I'm seeing it come to fruition and seeing this vision that he gave me, this picture that he painted for me, and I'm watching it play out in my current day. And other people are getting excited when I share what is going on, what we're doing. The fact that other people are getting behind this mission that the Lord shared with me it just makes me so happy and makes my heart so happy. So Audrey and I will be doing an episode going over everything as far as our trip to Florida, what that was like, launching the company, everything that has gone into this, what we are going into, what is next. And I am just so, so excited. And so stay tuned for that. I hope to goodness I don't spill anything because I just have held on to this for almost a year and I am just ready to scream it from the rooftops. But so we'll move on. Some personal updates. As far as I know some people have been asking, like, okay, where's the home renovations? Where are we at in that process? I know you were in the thick of that. Yes, as far as home renovations go, we pretty much have the downstairs done, which is really exciting. We have trim, we have baseboards or whatever you want to call it in our downstairs. The downstairs bathroom is almost done, which is super exciting. Pretty much everything is done. It just the mirror that we purchased for downstairs didn't fit, so we need to go get a new mirror. And then the long awaited update, we fixed the pool. I don't think that I have mentioned this, but it has been about maybe a 3 weeks to a month. I know with our last episode being the 1 year anniversary, I didn't really give any personal updates, but yes, the pool, we've been swimming in the pool. We got it under control. If you missed any of those details, basically the pool looked like Shrek's bathwater. It looked like a swamp until one day it was literally peeling, like the algae was peeling up in strips, and so I was able to brush it all out and get it all vacuumed and things like that. So the pool, we've been using the pool. I'm trying to get in it every single day to soak up the last little bit of summer that we have. In 1 year, I have my sister telling me about pumpkin spice and everything, whatever. And then I'm trying to cling to the last little moments of summer that we have because my pool finally got open. So that has been a really fun time as far as, being out in the backyard, getting some sunlight, and just enjoying the pool that we've had in our backyard, obviously. So it's been a lot of fun. So for today's episode, I'm just going to get right into it because I do have a lot to cover today. Since our theme is godly influence and legacy, I was praying about this and I'm like, what comes to mind when I think of godly influence and legacy? And truly, when I think of legacy in the Bible, I think of, besides Jesus, obviously, I think of Queen Esther. And so that is what we are going to be studying today. Think of this as your weekly best friend's Bible study today, because that's what we're going to be diving into, is doing a Bible study today on the book of Esther. So just go ahead, open up your Bibles, and we're going to be just staying in Esther the whole time, pretty much. I did have to whip out my sweatshirt. If I perish, I perish sweatshirt, because obviously I can't talk about Esther and not wear this sweatshirt. It is one of my most favorite sweatshirts. So I just want to open it up with this. And this is what I've been just really studying as far as what does legacy mean? Like when we think of legacy in culture, like what does that mean? Legacy is what you leave in people, not what you leave for people. So basically, after you are gone, how do people feel when they think about you? What's the impact that you made on people after you're gone? Esther's obedience shaped history. I mean, there is a feast in the Bible in her honor based on the actions and the obedience that the actions that she took. So a little bit of background on Esther. She was a Jewish orphan raised by her cousin Mordecai, and she shows up in Esther chapter 2, and that's actually where we're going to start today. So I'm going to go ahead. I have the NIV version on my computer on the BibleApp.com, and so I think that's just what I'm going to read today. You guys know this, I love New King James Version, but have a soft spot for NIV, and I think I'm leaning more towards NIV, like the more I read my Bible. So I also like the Passion version. The Passion is really nice, but I think today we're going to read from the NIV version, and I would love to get an NIV Bible. I always tell this, I am a physical Bible promoter. I believe that everybody should have a physical Bible and not just rely on apps and computers and things like that, simply because a physical Bible cannot be changed. I'm not saying that the Bible.com or whatever changes anything like that, but a website can be hacked and manipulated versus a physical Bible. A physical copy cannot be changed, it cannot be touched or anything like that. So I always say have a physical Bible, and that's what I read daily is my New King James Version, but today we are going to be reading NIV. I think a little bit too, another side note, I think NIV, especially for Old Testament, NIV can be a little bit easier to understand, and as well as the English, what is that version? The English Standard Version, ESV, is also good as well. So when it comes to studying the Old Testament, I do like to do ESV and NIV. But Esther chapter 2, I'm going to be reading chapter 2, verses 1 through 20. We are going to be reading a lot of Esther, the book of Esther today. So like I said, grab your Bibles and strap in. Verse 1. Later, when King Xerxes, also I'm going to try my best to enunciate some of this, but there is just some words that I cannot pronounce. Verse 1. Later, when King Xerxes' fury had subsided, he remembered Vashti, what she had done, what he had decreed about her. Then the king's personal attendants proposed, let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. Let the king appoint commissioners in every province of his realm to bring all of these beautiful young women into the harem at the citadel of Susa. Let them be placed under the care of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women, and let beauty treatments be given to them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This advice appealed to the king, and he followed it. Now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, who had been carried into exile from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, among those taken captive. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This young woman, who was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. When the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many young women were brought to the citadel of Susa and put under the care of Haggai. Esther was also taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Haggai, who had charge of the harem. She pleased him and won his favor. Immediately, he provided her with her beauty treatments and special food. He assigned to her 7 male attendants selected from the king's palace and moved her and her attendants into the best place in the harem. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. Every day he walked back and forth near the courtyard of the harem to find out how Esther was and what was happening to her. Before a young woman's turn came to go into King Xerxes, she had to complete 12 months of beauty treatments prescribed for the women, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with perfume and cosmetics. And this is how she would go to the king. Anything she wanted was given to her to take her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, she would go there, and in the morning return to another part of the harem. The king's eunuch was in charge of the concubines. She would not return to the king unless he was pleased with her and summoned her by name. When the turn came for Esther to go to the king, she asked for nothing other than what Haggai, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the harem, suggested, and Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. She was taken to King Xerxes in the royal residence in the 10th month, the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave her a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his nobles and officials. He proclaimed a holiday throughout the provinces and distributed gifts with her royal liberty. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, but Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do, for she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. So either by, and just some notes that I have after reading that, so either by suggestion by her cousin Mordecai or by force, Esther is now thrown into the running to be the next queen. So from the text, we can know that she is a beautiful woman. Everyone who looks at her is just amazed by her physical beauty. So it very well could have been, hey, her cousin threw her into this and said, hey, you're beautiful. You actually have a chance of winning this thing and being the next queen. Or they could have seen her like walking down the street and said, hey, you're going to be in the running for the queen. We don't really know. But she goes through a year of preparation with beauty treatments to make sure she is ready to be queen. So let this be encouraging to somebody that your season of preparation is not a wasted season. Sometimes when you feel like nothing is going right, the Lord is preparing you to then walk into your next season. She had to go through this because she literally was going from an orphan to a queen. They were preparing her to go from being very poor to being royalty. And I actually heard Pastor Devin teach on her beauty treatments, which is just so wild what she went through and all these different things. But basically, they put her in a sweat chamber. So think of like a sauna just to sweat out all of the impurities. But while she was sweating, and it says there that they did oils and myrrh and all these different perfumes. So essentially, as she was sweating out all of the toxins, they replaced it with the oils and the essential oils, the perfumes, so that when she would sweat in the future, she would sweat out these oils instead of the smell of the body odor, because sweat was not permitted in the king's chambers. The smell of sweat reminded the king of where she came from. And Esther is not chosen as queen because of her striving. It simply is the provision of the Lord. And when we tie this all back to legacy, so legacy often begins at places that we do not expect. And so God places us strategically even when we do not see the bigger picture. There are so many times that I look back at my life of seasons past and then seasons present, and then seasons future. And there are so many times where I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, if it wasn't for XYZ, then I would not be prepared for being strategically placed in my present. And then that is also preparing me for my future. God is so intentional, and the strategicness of the Lord placing Esther where she is truly a picture of how he places like the chess pieces that he moves around, and everything works out for the greater good. No season is a wasted season. Because who knows that when Esther, say her parents were alive, she was living with her parents, she was living a normal life, would she have had the opportunity, not living with Mordecai, not living where she did? Maybe she would not have even had the opportunity to then become queen. So we have to look at every single aspect. So while Esther is sitting as queen, God strategically places Mordecai to sit at the city gate, or it's like our version of like a city hall. Most business transactions happen here. A lot of important people are at this city hall type of building. And so now we're going to read chapter 3, verses 1 through 15. After these events, King Xerxes honored Haman, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all of the other nobles. All the royal officials at the king's gate knelt down and paid honor to Haman, for the king had commanded this concerning him. But Mordecai would not kneel or pay honor to him. When the royal officials at the king's gate asked Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" Day after day they spoke to him, but he refused to comply. Therefore, they told Haman about it to see whether Mordecai's behaviors would be tolerated, for he had told them he was a Jew. When Haman saw that Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor, he was enraged. Yet having learned who Mordecai's people were, he scorned the idea of killing only Mordecai. Instead, Haman looked for a way to destroy all Mordecai's people, the Jews. Throughout the whole kingdom of Xerxes. In the 12th year of King Xerxes, in the first month, the month of Nisan, the pur was cast in the presence of Haman to select a day and month, and the lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Xerxes, "There is a certain people dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, who keep themselves separate. Their customs are different from those of all people, and they do not obey the king's laws. It is not in the king's best interest to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued to destroy them, and I will give you 10,000 talents of silver to the king's administrators for the royal treasury." So the king took his signet ring from his finger and gave it to Haman, the enemy of the Jews. "Keep the money," the king said to Haman, "and do with the people as you please." Then on the 13th day of the first month, the royal secretaries were summoned. They wrote out in the script of each province and in the language of each peoples all of Haman's orders to the king's satraps, the governors of the various provinces, and the nobles of the various peoples. These were written in the name of King Xerxes himself and sealed with his own ring. Dispatches were sent by couriers to all king's provinces with the order to destroy, kill, and annihilate all of the Jews, young and old, women and children, on a single day, the 13th day of the 12th month of Adar, and to plunder all of their goods. A copy of the text and the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so they would be ready for that day. The couriers went out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered. So at this point, Esther is sitting as queen for 4 years. King Xerxes, her husband, made Haman second in command. So in this position, people bow to him, and Mordecai, a Jew, because he worships the Lord, refuses because he felt like bowing to Haman was worshiping him. And Haman's ego, his pride is stung. He feels so disrespected by Mordecai because one Jew disrespected him. Haman decides to kill all of them. And because of the covenant that God has with the Jewish people, he obviously could not let this happen. So Haman seeks the advice of astrologers, magicians, and he sets out this plan that would then take place 1 year later. Haman tries to then basically butter up the king, gets his approval and his cooperation, and sweetens the deal by then offering 10,000 silver talents, which is equivalent to, and I looked this up, to 750,000 pounds of silver, which is also then equivalent to tens of millions of US dollars. But Haman, and I'm not sure if you caught this, but Haman did not even own that much money, but he was planning on taking it from the slain Jews. So without even verifying any of this information, the king just hands his signet ring, which if you're not familiar what that is, it's basically a ring that has like a stamp or like a circle on it. And then that's what they would almost like knuckle the seal. And so if it had the king's signet seal on it and then it was finalized, there was no reversing it. And we'll come up to that in a little bit. So Haman used the king's signet ring to then seal this decree. So letters are sent out that the Jews will be destroyed on the 13th day of Adar, which translates to March 17th, 473 BC. And so now we are going to read Esther 4, which is, I think, the most famous quotable book of Esther. So this is Esther 4, verses 1 through 17. When Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he only went as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. In every province to which the edict and order of the king came, there was a great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's eunuchs and female attendants came and told her about Mordecai, she was in great distress. She sent clothes for him to put on instead of his sackcloth, but he would not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach, one of the king's eunuchs assigned to attend to her, and ordered him to find out what was troubling Mordecai and why. So he went out to Mordecai in the open square of the city in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened, including the exact amount of money Haman had promised to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict for their annihilation, which had been published in Susa, to show to Esther and explain it to her. And he told him to instruct her to go to the king's palace to beg for mercy and plead with him for her people. Hathach went back and reported to Esther what Mordecai had said. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the golden scepter to them and it spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king." When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer: "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come into the royal position for such a time as this?" Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai: "Go gather all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. Esther is shut out from the outside world. She has no idea what's going on. She's probably like Rapunzel, like locked up in her room. Mordecai writes to her and begs her to petition to the king by sending her a message. Esther replies and says, "Hey, the king has not sent for me in 30 days. I don't know where I stand with him." Even as his wife, even as, I assume they're married, even as queen, Esther had to be requested. If she were to show up unannounced or unrequested, the king could have ordered her to be killed right on the spot. And that goes for anybody, not just the queen. And tying this back to legacy, legacy requires courage and obedience, even when it risks personal comfort and safety. And so Esther called for a 3-day fast for herself and the Jews, no food and no water. And this is legit life or death, because you can survive 3 days without food, but you cannot survive 3 days without water. And I just read this in 2 Chronicles chapter 7 in my quiet time the other day, and I'm just going to read it. It is so good. It's chapter 7, verse 14 through 15. "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. Now my eyes will be open and my ears attentive to prayer made in this place." And that's exactly what Esther and the Jews did was they humbled themselves by not eating. And I don't ever like to publicize or talk about it on social media on when I am fasting, but I will share that here because I feel like that is a safe place and in the context of what we're talking about. Currently, right now, I am on a fast in preparation for Women of Fire conference and the launch of the company. And there is just something about prayer and fasting that when you pray and fast and ask the Lord and petition to the Lord and ask Him and humble yourself by fasting and getting on your face, there is just something about the closeness that you feel with the Lord. To get closer to the Lord, if you ever feel like you are spiritually dry, getting close to the Lord, we must spend time in prayer, in Bible study, in fasting occasionally. And fasting is an important discipline that draws you more into the Lord's presence than I think anything. And it helps us know God's will and His ways. I know for me, even when I was little, it wasn't even giving up food. It was maybe giving up like my Nintendo DS, maybe something like that, like giving up an activity to spend more time with the Lord, or giving up social media, giving up whatever that looks like for you. But fasting and prayer is something God tells us to do. And that's exactly where Esther and the Jews, this was life or death, literally. Like they did that. They were humbled. They humbled themselves and they sought after the Lord. And this is one of the most quotable verses. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. And when I read that, I got goosebumps like all over. But I just want us to put ourselves in that statement because who knows whether you're building this business for such a time as this. Maybe you're creating for such a time as this. You're a voice for the kingdom for such a time as this. And we might not be in a situation like Esther where all of our people, like all the Christians, are going to be persecuted. But I don't know about you, but I know that Jesus is coming back any minute now. You were placed in this time for such a time as this to help prepare as many people as possible for the return of the Lord. And the more that I am getting closer to the Lord, the closer and closer I get to Jesus, that is my mission and that is my heart. And I've heard it even called like an Esther anointing, is preparing the way for the Lord, preparing people's hearts, planting seeds, whether that's planting seeds for Christians that are lukewarm and, you know, only going to church on Sunday to check off a box, and that is the only time they are spiritually fed, or planting the seed for in helping win the lost, like talking to somebody, sharing the gospel with somebody that is lost and is not following the Lord at all. So Esther chapter 5 verses 1 through 15. On the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the palace in front of the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne in the hall facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing in the court, he was pleased with her and held out to her the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half of the kingdom it will be given to you." "If it pleases the king," replied Esther, "let the king, together with Haman, come today to a banquet I have prepared for him." "Bring Haman at once," the king said, "so that we may do what Esther asks." So the king and Haman went to the banquet Esther had prepared. As they were drinking wine, the king again asked Esther, "Now what is your petition? It will be given to you. And what is your request? Even up to half of the kingdom it will be granted." Esther replied, "My petition and my request is this. If the king regards me with favor and it pleases the king to grant petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet. It will be prepared for them. Then I will answer the king's question." Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits, but when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Calling together his friends, his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him, and how he had elevated above the other nobles and officials. And that's not all. Haman added, I'm the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave, and she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. But all of this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. His wife and all of his friends said to him, have a pole set up, reaching to a height of 50 cubits, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai impaled on it. Then go to the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself. This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the pole set up. So, on the third day of the fast, Esther appears to the inner court of the king, and thankfully, the king did not kill Esther, and he actually replied, you can have half the kingdom. What do you want? So during Esther's fast, she had been fasting, but she also was preparing a banquet, and she invites the king and Haman to the banquet. So as the king and Haman are attending her banquet, she doesn't mention anything about the plot to kill the Jews, but she invites the king and Haman to another banquet the following evening. So maybe she felt like it was not the right time, maybe because this is the first time the king had really saw her in 30 days. She didn't feel like maybe she was warmed up enough to the king. So she just wanted to make sure that she was in good graces with the king. So she said, let's have another banquet tomorrow. And these guys like banquets, they like parties. So of course they're not going to say no. So then later that evening, Haman's friends and family, as he's boasting about all these accomplishments and then complains about Mordecai in the same breath, his family and friends respond to him by encouraging him to build a gallows. And this is an impaling stake, 50 cubits high, which is equivalent to 72 feet up in the air. And I love this about Esther's faith, is that she had no idea if this plan would work. But she started taking action by planning these banquets. Faith does not just sit back and do nothing. Faith is nothing without action. Her faith cooperates in whatever direction the Lord directs. And what I have learned is that faith requires both dependence on God and action. And I really want to do an episode. This might be a sneak peek to next episode, because I really want to do an episode on the gift of faith. It really is one of the spiritual gifts that the Holy Spirit gives us. And what I have learned also through fasting is that physically you might become weaker, but you gain spiritual strength. You become spiritually wise. And so between her fasting and her faith, her and the Lord were able to come up with this plan to go around what Haman had even thought of. And God gave her the wisdom to outsmart Haman in this awful plan. So we're going to pick up in Esther chapter 6, verses 1 through 14. That night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. The king said, who was in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about impaling Mordecai on the pole he had set up for him. His attendants answered, Haman is sitting in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would honor rather than me? So he answered the king, for the man who the king delights to honor Have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, with the royal crest placed on its head. One with the royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and the horses be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse and do just what you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits in the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Afterward, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief, and told his wife and all of his friends everything that had happened to him. His advisors and his wife said to him, "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin." While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. This is what cracks me up when people say that the Bible is boring, because this is basically reality TV. This is drama, and the Lord is a genius, and I don't feel like he gets enough credit for some of the loopholes. And I mean, if this was on Survivor, this would be known as savage gameplay, an iconic role reverse, tables turned, Uno reverse, whatever you want to call it. Because the fact that Haman can you imagine how he felt parading Mordecai through the city streets? The man that he wants dead, he is sitting there honoring him and telling the city about the honor that the king is paying to Mordecai. And I would love to just see the faces of the people that knew what Haman was planning. And if they saw Mordecai on a horse and Haman doing what he's doing, I would be doubled over laughing. I just know the Lord has a good sense of humor, because it's genius. I love it. God says that the humble will be lifted up and the proud is disgraced. Talk about a piece of humble pie. You are eating a big, fat piece of humble pie. The Lord really tried to knock Haman down a few notches, but he still continued on this rampage of trying to kill all the Jews. So now we're going to pick up in Esther chapter 7. This is at Esther chapter 7, verses 1 through 10. So the king and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet. As they were drinking wine on the second day, the king again asked, "Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? Even up to half of the kingdom, it will be granted." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and it pleases you, grant me my life. This is my petition, and spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, it would have been kept quiet, because no distress would justify disturbing the king." King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is he? The man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther said, "An adversary and enemy, this vile Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and queen. The king got up in rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" As soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, "A pole reaching to a height of 50 cubits stands by Haman's house. He had set it up for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king." The king said, "Impale him on it." So they impaled Haman on the pole he had set up for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. Again, talk about an Uno reverse. The king agrees, and Haman is immediately impaled on the very pole that he built for Mordecai, and God brought justice to the Jews. So, Esther chapter 8, verses 1 through 17. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told him how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed him over Haman's estate. Esther again pleaded with the king, falling on his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended the gold scepter to Esther, and she arose and stood before him. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favor and thinks this is the right thing to do, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling that dispatches that Haman devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, because Haman attacked the Jews, I had given his estate to Esther, and they have been impaled to him on a pole he set up. Now write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews, as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. At once the royal secretaries were summoned. On the 23rd day of the 3rd month, the month of Sivan, they wrote out all Mordecai's orders to the Jews and to the satraps, governors, and nobles of the 127 provinces stretching from India to Cush. These orders were written in the script of each province and language of each people, and also the Jews in their own script and language. Mordecai wrote in the name of King Xerxes, sealed the dispatches with the king's signet ring, and sent them by mountain couriers, who rode fast horses especially bred for the king. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. The day appointed for the Jews to do this in all provinces of King Xerxes was the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. A copy of the text of the edict was issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so the Jews could be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. God's intervention becomes even more clear as Mordecai receives everything that Haman wanted. He received property, he received power and position. Even though Haman has been killed, he's gone, he's out of the picture. There's still the problem of the edict that was written against the Jews. And anything that is sealed with the signet ring of the king cannot be reversed. And so now we are up a creek without a paddle, because if it stays like this, there's nothing that can be done. So the king then gives Mordecai and Esther permission to write a new edict, a new law, to then give the Jews permission to protect themselves. So finishing up in chapter 9, on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar, the edict commanded by the king was to be carried out. On this day, the enemies of the Jews had hoped to overpower them, but now the tables were turned, and the Jews got the upper hand over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in their cities in all provinces of King Xerxes to attack those determined to destroy them. No one could stand against them, because the people of all other nationalities were afraid of them. And the nobles of the provinces, the stirrups and the governors and the king's administrators helped the Jews, because fear of Mordecai had seized them. Mordecai was prominent in this palace. His reputation spread throughout the provinces, and he became more and more powerful. The Jews struck down all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying them, in that they had did what they pleased to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. They also killed the 10 sons of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. The name of those killed in the citadel of Susa were reported to the king that same day. The king said to Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman in the citadel of Susa. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It will be given to you. What is your request? It will also be granted." "If it pleases the king," Esther answered, "give the Jews in Susa permission to carry out this day's edict tomorrow also, and let Haman's 10 sons be impaled on poles." So the king commanded that this be done. An edict was issued in Susa, and they impaled the 10 sons of Haman on the 14th day of the month of Adar, and they put to death in Susa 300 men, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. Meanwhile, the remainder of the Jews who were in the king's provinces also assembled to protect themselves and get relief from their enemies. They had killed 72,000 of them, but they did not lay their hands on the plunder. This happened on the 13th day of the month of Adar. On the 14th, they rested and made it a day of feasting and joy. Jumping down to verse 20. Mordecai recorded these events and sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far. To them they celebrated annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and the month when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy and giving presents of food to one another to the poor. The Jews agreed to continue the celebration that they had begun, doing what Mordecai had written for them. For Haman, the enemy of all Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them and cast out their pur, that is, the lot, for their ruin and destruction. And then jumping to verse 27, the Jews took it on themselves to establish a custom that they and their descendants and all who join them shall without fail observe these 2 days every year in the way prescribed at the time appointed. These days should be remembered and observed in every generation by every family and in every province, in every city, that these days of Purim shall never fail to be celebrated by the Jews, nor should the memory of these days die out among the descendants. So Queen Esther, along with Mordecai the Jew, wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter concerning Purim, and Mordecai sent letters to all the Jews in 127 provinces of King Xerxes' kingdom, words of goodwill and assurance, to establish these days of Purim at their designated times, as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had decreed for them, as they had established for themselves and their descendants in regard to their times of fasting and lamentation. Esther's decree confirmed these regulations about Purim, and it was written down in records. To kind of summarize everything. So the Jews protected themselves and killed 500, including 10 sons of Haman. Esther then secures a second day of protection, and the Jews kill 300 more. The second edict, so the second day of battle, gave the Jews power to seize their enemies' possessions, but they refrain because they want to communicate the purity of their motives. Esther wanted the prize of having Haman's sons then hung on Haman's own gallows as a sign of victory for her and her people and the Lord. Because of their tremendous success, the Jews celebrate their deliverance in what they call the Feast of Purim. And the Feast of Purim is still to this day celebrated. So the word Purim comes from the Persian word pur, so P-U-R, or lot, because Haman used a pur to determine a date for his planned murder of the Jews. So that's the background on the word Purim. Purim then and now celebrates God and his power to turn what is meant for evil into something good. And so to take away, I know that was a lot of reading today. I think this might be my longest solo episode I've ever done, but I definitely wanted to give this study on Esther justice. I didn't want to just do some bullet points. So to tie it all back to legacy, to godly legacy and influence, when I think of Esther, her legacy simply comes down to obedience to God's timing and wisdom. And if that's anything we can take away from Esther, it's her boldness, it's her obedience. She used her influence to bring justice and to protect for generations after her. Not only did they kill Haman, but they also killed the 10 sons, solidifying the safety of the generations that come after her. So a God-honoring legacy often outlives us, but often points back to the Lord and not back to our own glory, our own legacy. You have been placed where you are for such a time as this, whether that be, like I said earlier, you're building a business for such a time as this. You are at your job for such a time as this. The people that are in your life are in your life for such a time as this. So in your quiet time, I just encourage you to ask the Lord to show you the season that He has you in, the physical places that He has you in, the people that are in your life, like I just said, for such a time as this. Ask the Lord to highlight these for you in your daily life and to speak to you for clear direction on your assignment in this season if that is not clear to you right now, or even more clarity, even more direction. Maybe you have an idea of the season that you're in, but ask the Lord to make that clear and maybe the direction that He has you going in. So I hope you guys like this episode. Let me know if you want to do more of this kind of style of episode. This is definitely, like I said, more Bible study discussion type episode, but I hope you guys loved it. I will be praying for you, and I will talk to you guys soon. I hope this episode blessed you today. If it did, please rate and review the show. It helps grow the podcast to reach more Proverbs 31 creatives just like you. Don't forget to follow the show so you'll automatically be notified when the next episode drops. I'll be praying for you. See you next week.